So I want to reflect on what the textbook authors are doing here. They want to characterize more than 100 years, 1715 to 1840, in terms of what the era meant. And it's huge. It is an era of revolution in three interwoven aspects of society. The Industrial Revolution means a change in the economic order. Intellectual revolution, massively new ideas that will transform life from this time period to our own day, as we will see. And that's related to the political revolutions that happen in this time period and that are an outgrowth of both of these others. So they try to flesh that out a little bit in the next paragraph, but this is a very quick sketch of what is a massive and profound change. The transformations of this period were informed by a new way of thinking that had its roots in the scientific revolution of the previous century. So they go on to say, in England, John Locke argued that reasonable and rational thought should supplant superstition, and Isaac Newton insisted upon empirical observation, rational evaluation, and logical consideration in mathematics and science. That's a very concise way to hint at something that I want to flesh out for you. We see preliminary steps towards science already in the 1500s, the early 1500s, when someone like Leonardo da Vinci is creating incredible notebooks full of drawings that are studies of anatomy. And he's actually breaking the law to exhume bodies so that he can dissect the human body to understand how it works as a mechanical system. And he's making exquisitely detailed and beautiful drawings. This is the beginning of a curiosity about how to understand biology. The scientific revolution is often dated to 1543 because of two important events. André Vesalius publishes the first illustrated manual of human anatomy. This is an engraving showing Vesalius conducting a public dissection as the act of dissecting bodies in order to understand anatomy is coming out of the shadows. At the same time, same year, 1543, Copernicus is establishing a revolution of the heavenly bodies, the orbit of the celestial bodies, publishing a treatise explaining that no, the sun does not revolve around the earth revolves around the sun. In the 17th century, Galileo, astronomer, physicist, engineer, used the new telescope to validate Copernicus's theory. He is then put under house arrest by the Roman Catholic Inquisition in 1632. Nevertheless, the great flowering of knowledge of the natural world has begun, and the Catholic Church cannot put that genie back in the bottle. Colonial expansion will involve a growth of knowledge about new places and new forms of biology. An artist like Anna Maria Sibylla Merian from the Dutch Republic will travel to South America and create botanical illustrations of insects in their larval stages and the flowers and fruits they feed on. The insects of Suriname. She is the beginning of what will be a massive effort to document botanical life, to know the insects and the plants of the world. This is before photography. So science at this point relies on artists, their skill in meticulous illusion, in order to create the documents that are essential to science. Science is not just about the scientific method. It is also about documentation of findings, documentation of evidence in order to share knowledge. And artists are instrumental in that component of science. And by 1735, we have Linnaeus creating a taxonomy of organisms. The animal kingdom, the regnum animale, that's Latin, dividing these organisms into the quadrupeds, the birds, the amphibians, and so on, creating a systematic order of how nature is organized. So we think of the 18th century as the time when science comes into its own, but it's actually important to know that it wasn't called science usually at the time. The term natural philosophy was more commonly used, meaning philosophy, love of knowledge, that's what philosophy means, love of knowledge of nature. That what we today call scientists were then thought of as philosophers who are in love with the discovery of nature's workings. And this is important because it points to the fact that 18th century people thought of the process of doing natural investigation as related to how they were to understand the human mind, the human place in the world, and human society. In other words, people like John Locke, pictured here, were scientists. He trained as a medical man. He was a doctor. He had a degree in medicine. But he is also one of the great philosophers of the 18th century. Indeed, the founder of what we call liberalism, liberal politics, the politics of human freedom, self-determination, and inalienable rights. I'll talk more about that in a moment, but just to notice, natural philosophy is now promoted in institutions. So in England, in 1662, you get the founding of a Royal Society for promoting natural knowledge. That doesn't mean the knowledge that comes naturally to you. It means knowledge of nature. And so we do have the term science used in the comparable academy founded by Louis XIV. So John Locke is a hugely important figure. The kind of Declaration of Independence and Constitution that was created in the United States would not have happened without his thought. The textbook introduces you to him with his importance in terms of science and the idea of empiricism, empirical investigation. He proclaims that what we know depends on what we take in through our senses. But he's also hugely important for having built his ideas in relationship to human society and made claims about human beings as naturally owners of themselves. He said that the king does not own his subjects. Every human being is an owner of himself or herself. He didn't say herself, but of course he should have. That's one of the hugest blind spots in Enlightenment philosophy. So he's building on ideas that had started in the 17th century when there was huge discussion about the nature of rule, partly because England saw a revolution in the 1600s. The so-called Glorious Revolution in Britain had occurred in 1689 when the Catholic King James was deposed and his daughter Mary, who was Protestant, and her husband William of Orange from the Netherlands were put on the throne. For philosophers like Locke, this led to questions about what are the conditions under which a government can be overthrown? What is the purpose of a government? How do human governments form? Locke was building on his predecessor Hobbes, who had formed the idea of a social contract. And according to Locke, the social contract between the government and the governed is that the government exists to preserve the liberties of the people. That the people are born free, naturally have inalienable rights to their own person, their own property, and their own freedom, and that the government is supposed to simply protect those rights, not in any way to oppress them. Well, I'm sure you can hear in these words the kind of language that was going to become essential to the Declaration of Independence in the United States, as well as to the French Revolution in 1789. So think of John Locke not only as a natural philosopher, a doctor, a scientist, but also someone thinking about what is the healthy way for humans to live and how to create that, which is what's going to come up in this century on a big scale.